Welcome. Today the topic is ego, egotistical, egoless. I realized that the word ego is challenging to get your head around and your heart around and the logic around. It's kind of like love, where as you hear it, there's really no good way to know that you're experiencing the word in the same way that someone else is. And it's very easy to use it to mean something, and then depending on who you're with, it can be an accurate vocabulary, or it may be incredibly inaccurate. So the way that I often speak about ego, I think might be a little wrong, but I'll talk through that first. So I think of ego as the self, the identity, the collection of labels and personality traits that is kind of the character that you play in the world. And very often, that is the result of your socialization and your training. So sometimes the ego, although it feels like myself, often when I say the ego is leading or you're letting your ego take control, what I'm actually meaning is that this part of you, this sense of self, this I, is actually not your true self. It's actually the collection of things you've been taught that you may have never even questioned. Your ego could be something that, hates people from another country, that identity that you're right and they're wrong. That ego could feel it's very important to get your name on the side of a building. Pride is what happens when ego is unchecked. But it was pointed out to me that maybe ego is not such a bad word. My friend David, he wrote, well, let me take a step back. Last night, I was out at a wine bar with the co-founders of this new company that I'm working with, and we got in a conversation about Steve Jobs. Many of them are reading this book, and I'm going to perform a cardinal sin, which I did last night, which is I jumped into a conversation, and I have not read this book. But I looked at the pictures in the middle, so I think I'm kind of qualified to talk about it. And so the question was raised about kind of how good was Steve Jobs? And admittedly, I have, without knowing much about him, I viewed him as someone who created a company and products and technology. And so to me, that's cool, but it doesn't fall into the realm of greatness. So it was odd for me when I saw so many people see him as his true hero. And so as the conversation last night and some other conversations about his role, this book, obviously a lot of people are reading in it, and it's, there's a lot of interesting things, but the idea of ego as a tool, without a belief that you have a purpose and you are the right person, you have, that you would not achieve these things. Now, the question is that should you achieve those things? And I think it goes back to my distinction between identity that comes from the outside and identity that comes from within. My friend David pointed out that ego comes from the Greek word signifying I. It has many different meanings, which include in relationship to self, to soul, identification, and the pop psych self-esteem. And he went on to point out, and I think is a good reminder, that ego is only a problem when it is unchecked, when it is not in balance, or when that ego identified, that self is identified to these false selves, to this pride, this boasting, and then from that place of being out of balance is where you become egotistical, and that being where you cannot see that there might be other truths besides your own. You cannot accept that anyone else could be right if it makes you wrong, and so that demanding that your truth is everyone's truth, that's egotistical. I think that a healthy ego is in their truth, but is not threatened by other truths. They may even work very hard and may even be be seen as being quite frustrating, maybe even a jerk to those around them because they feel a commitment to staying in integrity with their ego, with their self, with that identity of self. And that self is in alignment with their truth, with their divine self, with their loving self. And that healthy ego is what we should all be aspiring to, not necessarily ridding ourselves of ego. Now, the conversation came up last night, well, can you be egoless, and function in a corporate world? And that's where this idea of what is egoless versus healthy ego. And when I think of egoless, I'm thinking of people like Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle, people who are so in love with the state of awe and reality that they have no attachment to their role in it all. Whatever happens is perfect. The power of now, the loving what is. And now, can you be in that state and also run a company? I don't know. I don't know. It depends. Well, and I guess here's where it's possible, is that when you are in a balanced ego state, and it's something we talk about in meditation here, it's one of the underlying themes of Hug Nation, is that when you get clear, when your ego is in alignment, when you're not driven by this ego need, and which is often about fear and guilt and all sorts of judgments, but when you're in alignment and you do not feel driven from a place that is external, that is based on a fear, or when you're in that place, you are often open to receive guidance, to receive flow. Float more, steer less is about being open to the direction that comes not from your ego, but comes from the deep true self. I don't know the right words. I apologize if I'm mixing things up. I'm trying to say that the objective, I think, should be becoming in balance so that you have an identity, you recognize your strengths, and then you get to a place of healthy surrender so that this deep connection to truth or divinity or love guides you into what to do. You are become of service to something larger than you. And that was the argument that was made about Steve Jobs, is that he felt that he was of service to the evolution of culture, and that he was called to do these things. This is, again, my understanding as it's been explained to me. And again, and that is their understanding of what this author portrayed things at. So we're like 6 steps beyond a true experience of a real-life human being, but for argument's sake. So if you are a clear straw, if you have removed as much of the sediment, the issues, the false ego, the external stuff that is causing you to act from a place outside of love, if your straw is clear, then you are capable of acting in the world powerfully as an agent, as a servant of the divine. And that may take the appearance of something that seems like someone who has a huge ego. But the subtle difference of, no, I'm not building this empire because I want my face all over things. I'm building this empire because something deep inside that's connected to something greater than me is pulling me to add this, to lift this, to enlighten the world in this way. And it was exciting for me to be in that conversation last night, because here I am with the co-founders of this company, and that's the kind of dialogue we're having. How can we act from that place? How can we make sure we stay in check? How can we do the hard work, steer less, and yet paddle hard to make the things happen that we know or we are being pulled and drawn and called to do? I had an interesting experience a number of years ago where I was a part of a shamanistic ceremony. And one of the issues that I had been struggling with lately was about ego and about how can I see myself as someone who is of service. How can I see myself as a servant of the divine, as an agent of love, and yet be so damn flamboyant, potentially even obnoxious? How can I be bright colored, stand on speakers, love the microphones, love the stage, love attention, and still try to be a humble servant of the universe? And I had this download, this awareness during meditation, that it was almost like God grabbed me by the lapels and was like, dude, this is exactly how the universe wants to use you. Duh. Like, God is the painter. You're the paint. God needs bright colors just like he needs muted tones. And your purpose at this stage in your life is to be a very bright color in the palette and to speak loudly and stay centered, but to act in what feels right and natural to you. And that right and natural thing happens to be flamboyant, and that is a place of service. Be the paint. And I was kind of, oh, right. Okay, that's incredibly relieving that I can be true to myself as much as I can. It's a constant journey, I think, to try to differentiate what is external, what is pride, what is fear, and what is this inner truth. But sometimes that inner truth is flamboyant, is loud, is demanding attention or enjoying attention. And maybe that joy of being on stage is not pride. Maybe that joy is the universe's saying, right, cool, you're doing your job, keep doing that. It takes a lot of checking in to make sure that's the case. And that's why, you know, coming on board here and being asked to be a part of creating a culture that I think values that is, well, there's a lot of depth to how that feels like being in purpose and being called to do that as well. So I apologize for saying such mean things about you, ego. What I meant to say was that the ego is something that we should, our spiritual path is about coming to peace and honoring and making sure that the ego identity is not clouded by debris, but it is instead an expression of our connection to Source and our connection to love and a connection to our talents and all the wisdom that comes from within. And so if you are on that path of trying to get in touch with that inner wisdom and that inner truth and that inner love, well, kudos to you. And kudos to your ego. That ego is what needs to go out into the world and express your truth. And it is such an honor to share this planet with an ego like yours. Because from that self-love of the self, ego love, it is not egotistical. That love of self, because it is a recognition of the connection, that is the healthy ego that allows the love of others. That is what allows me so deeply to feel right now that I love you. I'm proud of you for taking those steps and walking that path, to taking the hard looks at those parts of yourself and going, is this me? Because what's really you is a damn miracle. Thank you for letting it shine out brighter and brighter. Let's have a hug. Grab yourself by the shoulders. Oh. Just as our ego is a part, an element to what we are. Our physical shape, our physical form is a part of it. And it's all works together to create this experience of humanness that is such a treat. So as we squeeze this body, we recognize all these parts and all this path of integration. We recognize that everyone we meet is on this path of this confusing path of integration. And sometimes they might slip up, they might be way off, just like we might be. And so we forgive them, and we forgive ourselves. And we recognize that it is that self-love, that love of the true self, that allows us to discern the internal and the external, that allows the true ego to be an agent of good in service to love. Let's take 3 breaths together, in through the nose. On behalf of Grandpa Caleb and all the love warriors, Happy Hug Nation, thank you for being you, for shining your light, and for letting that brilliant ego walk through this world and let ripples of your truth delight us all. Thank you. I love you. Namaste.